I'm Meg Inglis. I'm the Executive Director for the Native Plant Society of Texas, if you don't know who I am. And this session, we're going to take about 45 minutes to talk about, the title is Independent Growers, History, Challenges, and Solutions. And what this is, we're taking this issue back to Hart. We started talking about this at the 2022 Fall Symposium in Alpine. How many got to go to that? That was a lot of fun. So if you were there, then we had some good discussion at that point, and we talked about the difficulty of getting a greater quantity and a greater diversity of native plants into the hands of Texans. And the question became, what can the Native Plant Society of Texas do to further the cause of the native plant growers? And so some ideas that came out of that session were provide internships for people who want to grow native plants or help others do the same. We've actually done that. We're working with Michael at Sabot, and he's got an intern. We funded an intern for him, and I mean, I think that was a great idea, and we're moving on it. Another was make land available to those who might want to grow and sell native plants. I think that's a great idea too. We haven't taken the opportunity to, haven't found a way to implement that. And then somebody else said, bring growers together to discuss roadblocks and solutions. So what we want to do is we want to reassess what the society stands for, where the society stands, and then kind of give a progress report from that 2022 Alpine session. And this is a panel discussion to address that. So I don't know if you read had a chance to read the description, but these are some things that have happened since then. We became a member of the Texas Nursery and Landscaping Association, the TNLA, and we've hosted booths there for 2 years in a row at the expo in San Antonio. And you may or may not be familiar with TNLA, but it's a rather, it's a huge organization that's associated more with the conventional end of, let's say, plants. So we're considered a niche, and that's all we are to them. They haven't realized yet what an impact we can have on the plants that are being grown in Texas. And I think that's an area where, and Laura Leggett, where's Laura? Laura Leggett was the one that came up with the idea. Let's join TNLA. And we had, last time we went this year, we had 3 speakers, native plant speakers, and they were all well attended. People came to our booths. I think we'll have an impact as long as we continue to be a member there. And then since then, we've collaborated with HEB on native plant sales. We've done 3 of them so far. We don't make any money off of that. We just advise, and what we get is more visibility, because on the stakes that go into the plants, our logo's on it and the QR code goes to it. So that's a brand new thing that we've been able to finagle. And as I said earlier, we funded a San Antonio Botanical Garden summer internship, and I want us to do way more of that. We also have a very wonderful sort of improved plant rescue program that the Williamson County chapter started with Ashley Landry. And what she's doing is passing on unusual rescued plants to conservation groups such as Sabot. And so that's pretty much what we've done. And John Hart Asher, who, if you may have had the pleasure of hearing this morning speak in this room, is going to be our moderator, and we're going to have a panel discussion. So I'm going to turn it over to John.
Hello again. Unfortunately, you have to listen to me again. But more fortunately, it's not going to be me talking. It's going to be these individuals. So just introduce everybody in case they don't know. We've got a mix of wholesale nursery. We've got retail. And then we've got Michael Eason here with the San Antonio Botanical Garden Conservation effort. So I think we've got a good selection and mixture of individuals to have this discussion. So we've got Mandy Pixler right here from Native Texas Nursery. We've got Don Gerber. Well, we've got Bill Neiman. Let me go in order, from Native American Seed. We've got Don Gerber there from Pollen Natives, and then Michael Eason from San Antonio Botanical Garden. So we're going to have 4 or so 5 questions. We'll see how it goes. We're going to try to give about 2 minutes each per question so we can fit it within this time zone, but hey man, we'll be flexible. We'll see how it works out. And then we'll have about a 5 to 10 minute wrap up after we go through some of these questions. So we're going to start off, folks, as a nonprofit organization, what are effective ways, one, that how NIPSOT can help support the increase statewide of native plant wholesale and retail nurseries, but also what are things that the industry might be able to do on the inverse of that to help, essentially help them help you. Mandy, you want to start?
Yeah, I have kind of an indirect. Oh, is this is working? Oh, I'm good. Can everyone hear me? Okay, awesome. I have kind of an indirect way of how NPSOT could help, and you had mentioned that you guys have joined TNLA, and I'd love to see you guys there. It's super fun. But have you guys ever considered American Society for Landscape Architects? So I, being a grower, I'm exposed to on the daily bids and commercial projects that are a year or two out, and although I've increasingly seen an increase of native plants on the list, I still don't think there's enough. And oftentimes I hear from landscape architects that they just simply don't have the education when it comes to plant identification or what works with their specific project needs. And so, oftentimes too, I hear from them saying that they never get to get out of the office. So I think a great idea would be to organize some sort of native plant garden tour for landscape architects. They went on a tour this spring. They love to choose the spring to do this stuff. It's like, it's a nursery, we're really busy. But we'll do whatever we can to expose them to this. So we took the time and had them out for a couple of hours, about 20 different firms, and they were so excited. So there are eager landscape architects out there that want to plant natives. They just don't get to get out and actually expose themselves to that. So I think they would be really open to something like that, for sure.
There we go. So do you think that that's indicative of a larger decline in plant knowledge? I mean, not just within landscape architecture, but most folks hire a landscape architect. I have a degree in landscape architecture.
So, yeah.
And, expecting, these are the plant experts.
I think, obviously I'm sorry. So you're basically saying, like, as a whole, not just landscape architects?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. And later on with one of the questions, I had an answer that also, you can start at a grassroots level, like start in your elementary schools, your middle schools, and your high schools to get these future generations excited about native plants. And the biggest thing you can do with that is follow through with educational support for these teachers, for parents, and all the way up to the professional level with landscape architects. And then indirectly, I feel if there are more of these native plants out in our public spaces, it would probably put a little bit more pressure onto retail nurseries that don't typically carry natives to carry more natives, or if there's more of a market, there's going to be more of a demand causing people to start businesses that specialize in that. So,
Don, what's been your experience in terms of your nursery and sort of the demand and also how the plants are being used, right? Because if people are thinking of traditional flower beds versus more biodiverse installations, there's a big difference between the old school way of planting things and the more restorative, or whatever you want to label it, approach.
Yeah, well, we have as a retail nursery, we have two large groups of customers. I'm just generalizing. We have Native Plant Society members who are into native plants, and they want to buy weird things. They're collectors of weird things, right? They want to buy plants that they don't have. They're a smaller subset of my customer base, really. Like, the primary customer is going to be a homeowner. Part of the reason I chose my location is Converse, second biggest city in Bexar County. There's tens of thousands of new houses going up along the I-35 corridor. You get a lot of new homeowners that come in and are just like, I bought a new house. I got 6 shrubs and 2 trees, and half of that stuff's dead already. And they're just coming because I'm the local nursery. They don't always necessarily know about native plants. So, you know, as to the original question, like, this is, the three of us are in a business, right? Business comes down to demand and supply. And if you're asking the original question of, like, how do we increase supply? You increase demand. So as NIPSOT, as a state agency, all the education and outreach that can teach people about native plants and why they should be planting native plants versus non-native plants will help drive demand. So yeah, everything that the state agency can do to increase demand, whether that be the education programs, the visibility of the HEB program, all that kind of stuff, helps drive customers, which that will drive demand, like that'll drive supply eventually.
Do you feel that most of your customers are new to the state, are you saying, or are you saying that there's a difference? Because I can say from my aspect, being out some ASLA conventions in California and talked about native plants, I've had some folks say, we just wish we could, but there's not really any availability here like there is in Texas. So it makes me feel kind of really lucky to be part of a state that does have so much work. And of course, a lot of that's with Mrs. Johnson and other organizations like San Antonio Botanical Garden and BRIT and all those others. I think we're uniquely positioned somewhat that other states, I know Arkansas, for instance, doesn't, but Missouri's a little bit stronger on it. So do you feel that there's new people moving in because we're growing, or is it also sort of a dualistic general public that doesn't know as well?
Yeah, I get a fair amount of people who are moving here. I'm not a Texan. I'm from California. You can hate me for that. I had to learn the plants. But it's not just those people. Like people are just buying houses and as in my industry in retail, we have our own trade magazines like every other trade magazine. And I just read a thing a few months ago about, it's a trade magazine for independent garden centers. It's not about native plants, but there was an article in there about native plants and who are the consumers of native plants and why are they consuming native plants and why, as an independent garden center, should you carry native plants. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it had to do with younger people who are more climate conscious or want to use less water or conserve and do all that stuff. And it's just there's just a different outlook from younger people. And the demographic in my business is still older and women primarily, and they still buy native plants too. But I get a whole lot of younger people, and it's rather encouraging.
Wonderful. Well, Bill, I want to bring it to your court because while y'all do sell live roots, absolutely, would you say a primary or a large portion is seeding? And I know there's planting plants, that's one thing, but there's also sowing seed, which sometimes confounds people. So I'd like to know your experience sort of with this, demand. I mean, what have you seen, how the business has evolved over the years in terms from your perspective of being more of a seed supplier? I don't want to label you, but versus sort of a nursery experience that Mandy or Don might be talking about.
Well, thank you, John. And if you've got a minute, I could go back 50 years when I borrowed a shovel and a rake and a lawnmower and started a landscape construction company and a nursery. And I ran a nursery for 18 years. And I got to the point where I realized that what I was doing in the nursery was actually part of the problem. I thought my job would be to clean up behind the bulldozers and beautify. But as our climate began to speak to me in ways that I was able to hear, this was all the way back to 1980 of 100 days of 100 degrees with no rain in the DFW area. And rich, affluent people from out of state were moving into a little rural village called Flower Mound, which is now just about to 100,000 people. So, and I lived in the next village over that had 814 people called Argyle. And so to watch all of this evolution over this many years would take a couple more minutes. But a lot of the questions are almost answering themselves, like the architects are stuck in an office and they got stuck in the office right after they got unstuck from being in a university. And then they got unstuck before that from being in a high school. And so we have these people that are licensed to kill or licensed to design the built environment that we live in, but yet they may not have a lot of practical knowledge or just one-on-one relationship with something as diverse as what we are envisioning as advocates of the Native Plant Society, where there's something different that's occurred to some people. And then Don brings it up about the younger people who maybe inherently already have been exposed to the fact that we just plainly can't keep doing what we've been doing. And so it's all about offering an alternative, but then people have to know where that alternative is. And so this is back to the question, what can the Native Plant Society do? And you hit it right on the head, Don, as far as trying to have a .org get involved in meddling around with a .com. It really needs to step back, us to Nick, and not get too hung up about the real fine details of how to run a business, but in fact, it's going to happen from driving demand. And that is what NIPSOT is really good at, is education, but you just need to hone that and find ways to streamline that and to amplify that. So the change that I think we're really looking for at the nursery level is going to come when there's people just driving the door down at the nursery and saying, where's the native plants? I'm not buying all this other stuff. You don't have them, I'm going somewhere else. And somebody's going to show up with them. So, yeah.
Michael, I'd love to hear your perspective from how you think that you fit in this, coming from a conservation organization versus sort of the nursery trade, and how you're supporting this effort, and you feel that NIPSOT and the public in general can help drive this change as well.
That wasn't one of the questions. So I do agree. So education is a huge thing. And so I think I'm in a sort of unique position here, being a botanist, being an ecologist for 20 plus years, and then moving into San Antonio Botanical Garden, where I was tasked with growing plants, which I'll be the first to admit that I know nothing about growing plants. So that was kind of a blessing in disguise, you could say, because I didn't have to fall for oh, that's going to be a difficult plant to grow. And I'm pretty amazed at how successful we've been with some of these plants that I've always been told were really difficult. I think the difficult part was just going out and collecting them and having access to some of that stuff. But education is a huge thing. I've often been called to go to whether it's a public botanic garden or a public garden or a private garden and inform people like, hey, what's going on with my plants here? And I'll look and there'll be, a desert willow planted next to a yucca and an agave, and all three of those need different water regimes. And you pull back on one to help the yucca, the desert willow is going to suffer a little bit. So there is that education part that's coming down that has to happen. Luckily, at San Antonio, we've recently installed the Water Saver Community Garden, which was a mix of native and adaptive plants. And after it had sort of gone through its first 6 months, 8 months or so, the architects, the landscape architects that designed that, along with a bunch of other people that they invited, we toured the gardens. And I was amazed to see all of these folks writing down like which plants each one we stopped off at. And it was pretty enlightening to see that, one, they're interested, they just probably don't have that avenue to learn. And so maybe that's one way, is reaching out more towards the landscape architects, and of course, starting, as Amanda said, from beginning to end. And that's one of our philosophies at San Antonio, is whether you're 3 years old or 103, there's always something to learn there. And we always have an opportunity for folks to learn something about native plants. I know Meg had brought up the internship. I think that was a great thing. It just fell in our lap, and it worked out wonderfully. So that's something that NIPSOT could do, is sponsor these internships, and I would say specifically for propagation, and not some other avenue of native plants or botany. I will say, when I was involved with going through a lot of the scholarships that were passed around through NIPSOT, most of them are not about propagation. They're mainly science-based, which is great, but there's a huge lack of knowledge when it comes to propagating native plants. So that's one thing, is to actively look at getting more students, especially students that are in the Hart side of growing.
Just curious, so you're saying they're looking at it from a different scientific perspective versus, how does this plant even?
Right. So some of the grants were offered to students, and there's nothing wrong with this. It's just some of the grants were offered to students that were doing soil biology and whether or not that helps a certain species.
Okay.
Things like that.
So, I think one question is that we're looked on our list of questions, but this is tying into, though, is, and I want to jump back though a little bit, but it seems like your comment about the grouping of plantings, because it seems like, and I've certainly seen it too, it's people say, oh, I want native plants, and then just because the label there is native, then you get all sorts of weird things going on that isn't really going to result in a successful project or a successful flower bed or whatever. So, how can we get the community also, and other suppliers to also understand and start thinking about plant communities versus individual specimens? Because I think that's sort of indicative of the sort of, you go to a nursery, you buy annual, you stick these sort of in here, it's interchangeable. How can we look at and think about these in these larger communities so that, one, it will offer you more resilience through these crazy droughts and freezes that we're getting, but two, that you have a larger sustainability in terms of success, right? Those communities are going and they're thriving and they're doing what they need to do.
Totally agree. And again, it comes down to education. And again, I think part of my sort of unique past is, sort of recognizing how plants interact in the wild. And a lot of people don't understand that. And it's great that we live in the future right now, and anyone can pick up a phone and ID a plant in probably 20 seconds. But what do you learn? And unless you're going out and looking at how these plants are interacting in the wild with other plants, their specific needs or niches that they occupy, sticking them in a landscape and 5 times over, and every time they die, maybe you need to take a step back and learn some of this. I will also say that we do have a fairly robust native plant trade here in the state of Texas. And a lot of people are surprised when they learn that many of their plants are native. And in the past, there has been this perception of native plants, oh, those are just weeds. But when you say, no, that Tacoma stands is native to Texas, or this, whatever it may be, is native to Texas, they're like, oh, I had no idea. So we do have a fairly robust native plant trade. We just need more diversity. And I think that in the presentation I gave a few years ago, we have more cultivars of Salvia gregii currently for sale than we do have species of salvia in the state of Texas. And so you can probably count on one hand how many species of salvia are actively available in the trade. And there are so many more out there that can be used. Same thing with oaks. 58 species of oak in the state of Texas. We probably sell, what, 5 regularly? Some of those came out of parking lots. They're probably hybrids.
We've got a question right here. Meg?
Okay, education is really important. I agree. We have the Native Landscape Certification Program, which tries to cover everything. So before we go further, I want to say there is one Native Landscape Certification Program, Level 4, that talks about plant communities, and you don't have to take Level 1 in order to take Level 4. So we have a class. Now, I'm from an education background. I did an LCP for many years. I think NLCP it's a great program, but I think we need to branch out on how we educate people, because I don't think that people necessarily have all day long to go to a day-long program. You know, we devised a really great program where you have presentations and then you go out and you look at the stuff in the wild. But it takes a full day, and the nurseries in particular are like, well, we can't send anybody on a Saturday or a Sunday to do this. Are you joking? Especially during the, busy season. So I've been thinking a lot about how we can get education for government employees who are doing maintenance, for people working in nurseries, and for the other crowd that I think we need to reach is the group that's the home buyers. Like, my son just bought a house. He's got a back, and they go and buy these houses in Kyle with a backyard with St. Augustine grass in them and maybe a little tree, maybe not. They don't put trees in the back anymore. So how do we educate these people? This is like short films on the website, hour-long presentations, or just, help us with that.
So one of the things I had down was sort of hosting community events in some of these neighborhoods where NIP sought as a chapter. This gets in chapter, not necessarily state level, but also how easy would it be for NIP sought during spring, the busy time, to have a table at any native plant nursery or nursery that sells natives, and be there actively to be the experts and answer questions and inform those people as they're coming in. So reach them before they buy the plants.
No, I think that one's yours. This is ours.
Anybody else want to follow up on mine?
Well, if it's open mic kind of a thing, yeah.
This is jazz, baby.
Yeah, I like it. It feels good, thanks. The music sounds great. So this kind of conversations is crucial as an entity that's looking for itself and how to move forward. And there's a lot of things that NIPSOT does that's right. And it just needs to keep doing it. One of the previous speakers said something about, if it's not broke, don't fix it. It's not really broken. It can be streamlined and it can be amplified. There are aspects, though, that need a little caution. And if you don't mind, I'll take a second and spin off just a little bit from whatever it is that where we've landed, but back to putting my shoes.
We're here.
Yeah. If I was to get back into my nurseryman shoes instead of a dirt farmer poet type shoe, what really was one painful thing to watch as a younger person when there wasn't, when I started, there wasn't a NAFTA, much less a global trading or a Bezo or an Elon. There were small family businesses. And the nursery trade lends itself to that really well. And really what it is that we are dreaming about is even more conducive to small scale, very intensive regional ecological nurseries that are serving what the big global traders now have completely consumed away from the families. In my experience, I worked until, I've worked 18 years in it. The last vital years, 2 or 3 years, I've been a member of, before it was TNLA, it was Texas Nurserymen Association. And it actually shrank because there were, at the conventions, there would be 10,000 people at those. And the nurserymen and women and the vendors, the bigger growers, they had their families there. Their wives and their kids would come. Weston was born about the time that I shut the nursery down, 2 years before I shut it down. But both of my kids, one's 40 and one's 35 or 6 now, that were in strollers, and we were going through the TNLA, and I, as a nurseryman, I was so excited when my kids grew up and we get back to this point where they want to contribute. Weston really got into this packaging idea, and so that it could go to nurseries, and I was like, man, I know how to do that. Let's go to TNLA. We got an exhibit, we got there wasn't 500 or 600, there was less than 1,000 people. This was in Dallas, Texas, at the convention center. And the landscape totally changed. One of the reasons that I collapsed financially, large grocery stores in the next town over, in Louisville from Flower Mound, it was less than 5 miles from my nursery, were selling bales of peat moss and 1-gallon plants cheaper than what I could buy them for. I was buying, for example, peat moss in diesel tractor trailer load. I would buy 1 or 2 a year that I could sell that much. And of course you get the best price if you can handle the whole load at once, and you got other problems. You got to figure out the storage and you got to be able to move that stuff, and you got to have the cash to put that much money just sitting there. So, but the grocery store, which now have merged and purged, and now they're just semi-big boxes, not a whole lot different than what happened to all of the small lumber yards, the family, or the hardware stores, or the dress shops, or the bakeries, or everything that's happening to us. I could buy the peat moss cheaper at the grocery store than I could from a wholesale supplier, because they were buying train car loads of it. They could advertise, they'd buy the whole back page of the Dallas Morning News. I'm talking about before there was computers and all of this kind of stuff. A quarter-page ad in the Dallas Morning News for me was $1,500 back in the 1980s. And they could buy the whole back page and advertise for 35 stores in the DFW area. And so there was no way I could compete. So I tried calling a couple of native nurserymen to try and get a feel about what's it like out there these days. And it was pretty humbling to to hear the sincere passion, but also the disgust and almost disappointment of this thing, the potential of this, what put me, well, I knew that I had a different calling to go to the seeds, but the economics were very difficult in the nursery operation to try and compete with a grocery store that's down the street. And that is something that I think the organization might want to try and reckon with, of how this possibility plays out in today's world any differently than it did in my days back then, 40 years ago. The idea, though, to just not get too hung up on that is this thing about trying to build demand from the ground up and shine a light on the nurseries that are there. And if there isn't a nursery, shine a light on a lot of these communities. Even Junction, Texas has a native landscape that's worth showing off. The one at the school that Weston showed a little earlier. And make a deal out of it and have an event there and invite the public.
I'm glad you said that, so I don't have to. But I will say, advertising's free these days. Yeah. So one of the things, and this kind of jumps to the next question about more chapters or individuals within NIPSOT or even the state, heavily promote. I mean, we have these things in front of us with social media, like it or hate it or love it or hate it. It's an amazing way to reach people. And how many people, I would just raise your hand, that you've been to a native nursery, you've purchased a plant, and you posted something about that on social media and said, hey, I just bought this at XYZ nursery and I'm planting it in my yard. Y'all should go visit them. How many people are in NIPSOT these days? 5,000. That's 5,000 free advertisers. Yeah. And these are things you can, I bought this plant at Pollinatives, took it home, planted it, and then, hey, look at it 3 months from now. Look at all the pollinators on it. So there's those opportunities to self-promote amongst all of us. And I know just from kind of what I've seen on social media, that doesn't happen a lot. So we have to be our own champions, and if we're not going to do it, nobody else is.
Don, I know y'all do some good advertising I've seen, sort of on Instagram and other social media. What's y'all's approach?
Yeah, I'm over 50. I do the best I can. I've had several people just recently tell me like how much they appreciate that I share other native nurseries information. There's a little one here, Kim in Austin. She's doing little pop-ups. I share her information. People up in Dallas-Fort Worth. Nativo's a brand new native plant business. I share their information. I'm not competing with these other people in my mind. Like a rising tide floats all ships.
It's the ecosystem.
Right? Not every place has a native plant nursery. San Antonio is a great city for this. We have 2 specialty native plant nurseries. But our chapter, our NIPSOT chapter, they do tabling at the big IGC in town that's not a native plant nursery. They got the native plant, they got that IGC to install a native plant demonstration garden with signage that has NIPSOT's name and the chapter and all that kind of. So that's things that chapters can do in places that don't have a native plant nursery. Not every place has specialty native plant nurseries. So if you're looking for things that chapters and individuals can do, if you live in an area that doesn't have a native plant nursery, but you have at least an independent garden center, then again, the demand, like if you can create a demand, if the chapter can go and have a tabling event there and create a native plant demonstration garden and convince that retail garden center to establish a native plant area, like just set this area aside and just put only the native plants over there so that we can direct people to your business and they'll be able to find the native plants. Because a lot of customers are like, oh, I hear all these great things, but I can't find the plants.
Yeah, I would like to hear your perspective.
Yeah, when I was in West Texas last week, and I'm sure everyone's aware Mountain State's severely downsized, and the common narrative out there was like, we can't find frog fruit, and I'm over here laughing because I'm like, we've got like 3,000 flats, only 350 miles away. So I think, yeah, I mean, I just think that people don't have access to the knowledge of where this stuff is. Now, we are in a special situation. We are a wholesale grower. We're not open to the public. We do have a social media account that I use to usually feature the cat because it's super cute. But it's really cool. I've gotten all these followers, some from customers and then just some from homeowners. And I have, Emily was a little worried about it, thinking, oh no, you know, they're gonna try and come and buy plants from you or us, and it's gonna be a problem. It has been zero problem. I think people are just excited to see the plants that we feature. I featured 10-gallon kidney wood, covered in hundreds of blooms a couple weeks ago, and I had a bunch of homeowners private messaging me, and I just shot them to different retail nurseries around their area that I knew that we sold them to. So, you know, even from the wholesale grower position, social media has been a really cool tool. And I will usually often share posts that Donald does. Anytime I see that we have a delivery truck at Nativo, I see our truck, I'll post that. And I get surprisingly a lot of engagement, and I'm kind of offended because my own personal Instagram account, I have like 200 followers. No one cares apparently about my kids, but they love the cat and they love native plants. So it's a really, really helpful tool, and I think it goes, as Michael was saying, it's free, you know, and it's getting, and it's easy as well too. Once you kind of get the hang of it, it takes 5 minutes to make a post and get reach to thousands and thousands of people. So anyway.
So would it be helpful for NIPSOT to provide, given that y'all are businesses for the most part, to provide y'all with data on what they are selling, the numbers that they are selling, and likewise what has maybe been requested or they don't have, or would that be helpful at all?
Yeah, I was really excited about this question, actually. That would be extremely helpful. We, every year, usually around June or July, we have what we call R&D meetings, and all of us get at the table and we come with our 5-6 little suggestions. Some get weeded out, and typically a couple of them are just because I'm like, oh, I'm super nerdy, this is fun to grow, but typically, we will retain like 3 or 4 of those just by natural propagation issues, whatever, what have you. But we don't have that information right now that we can bring to those meetings. So that would be a really helpful tool in making some decisions with our plant palette. Specifically, I wanted to mention, in case there's any East Texas and PSOT people out here, I think we could expand our East Texas palette. Like, we grow very little that grows out there, and I think that there's a huge market for that. So I would love to hear from NPSOT, especially after these plant sales, and during these plant sales, you know, facilitating open discussions with your customers and getting really good, true feedback. And then, of course, statistics would be helpful as well, because as a business, again, I think we've all mentioned it a few times, you know, we're a for-profit business, and so if there's no demand, there's really no need to make the supply. So, but.
Don, what about you?
Yeah, I think, you know, for me, like, I'm a native plant business, but, you know, when you're talking about non-native plant, IGC, like independent garden centers, like, you know, it's stated, like, I've asked even at Native Texas before, what about this species? I think I could sell this species, and been told, you know, we're effectively full, right? So they use all of their space. So if you're asking them to bring in a new species that they haven't previously grown, that means they're having to go and get rid of a previous species that they currently are growing. So you have to prove to them that it's going to be more profitable than one of their species that they're going to have to get rid of. But on the same thing, I have to, I've given plants. I just was in Dallas, Fort Worth at Southwest Perennials. I gave him some plants. I was like, hey, I could sell hundreds of these every week. Here's a sample, see if you can grow it from cuttings. I don't know if you can or not. Try and figure it out. Here, go play with it. I gave plants and seeds to Inevitable here in Lockhart. Said, look, if you can grow this, I'll sell it. So here's some seeds. If you grow them out, I'll buy them from you. And I'm not trying to keep them to myself either. So if you're successful at growing this and you can sell it to your other customers, sell it to your other customers. I hope it goes mainstream and becomes the next biggest thing in the plant industry. I'll bring you another one. There's literally thousands of native plants that would look great in landscapes, and I'll bring you a new species to try and figure out how to grow.
Bill, y'all sell quite a wide variety too. I mean, how do you base, would that be helpful too for NIPSOT to say, given, y'all's being more of a seed-focused nursery, so to speak, how that might drive y'all's model? Because again, it's a little bit different between Don and Mandy.
Yes, there's a lot of differences between a nursery and a nursery client or customer versus a person that is comfortable with using seed.
Yes.
It's very uncommon that people would landscape with seeds, to tell the darn truth.
Yep.
And yes, we would take all the feedback we can get and all the data that Weston, since he's come along and matured into a thing, he is a data guy. And he's running the data, and he knows how to run data and how to extract the meaning of data. So we would appreciate that. For me, I went to the 11th grade, and I was speaking with someone in the room whose father did the same thing I did, who hitchhiked for an education back when you could do that. So I've done the thing of how to address diversity and stick my toe out there and that's how Native American seed was hatched. Nobody was doing this, and I felt compelled that if this doesn't get done, we're going to see the extinction of these species. And you don't know how many hours I have sat running the combine on native prairies and seeing species that can't be harvested mechanically, and saying very small words of honor and like prayers for these species that the Homo sapiens doesn't have the intelligence to recognize, much less how to relate them to the web of life that is going on all around us. That is really the bigger elephant in the room, is what there is in our genes of the last 400 years, that and then the types of environments that we grow up in is the only way we can really shift ourselves. And some people have various advantages, and some people are very disadvantaged in how they grow up. So I've always, back to the real question of how about these things that aren't in the marketplace, we have a portion of our farm that it's probably, I've never really broken it into the analytics, but it's probably 15% of our farm is in 100-foot rows that are set there so that we can do things that we don't know what we're doing. Once we think we know what we're doing and how it would fit, then we get enough of it to offer it to the public. And sometimes that is just in very small packets, and I think this is where this type of model, but you have to be gutsy, you have to be willing to get up early, you have to stay late, and you can't be particularly driven only by money. And that's the other flip of what's wrong with the nursery trade, and they layer in the big box thing, and it's all about money. And it is data, and it is numbers, and it's all about money, and if diversity doesn't mean anything. Regional plants doesn't mean anything. Even using up the last drop of water doesn't mean anything. It's all about the profit or the shareholders or the stock or all of these things. So convenience, we've always done it this way, and all of this is going up and down the thread of everything, including the architectural schools that are still stuck in 30, 40-year-old textbooks, So you can see we have a huge undertaking, but it's not a reason for us to get bummed out about some kind of apocalypse coming. There is a lot of good stuff. Are we nearing the end of this talk?
Yes, but Michael, we want to get your perspective too, real quick.
I would like to reserve, if we can, just a minute at the end and flip through some images that might be helpful more so than just our hot air and words as a wrap-up. And I know that somewhere we got to wrap. Go for it, Michael.
Well, once again, I get to agree with Bill. Are you sure? I'm positive. So I think at the beginning of this, we talked about education, right? And the lack of knowledge that a lot of people, the general public, has when it comes to native plants. So my question is, why would you want them to tell you what you want to grow? And you do have to take that risk. And you do have to be able to make that effort and say, hey, here's something really cool. We're going to not necessarily force on people, but say, we need to take that risk and grow it and get it out there, because we have over 5,000 native plants in the state of Texas. And I would say, less than maybe 300 are available in the nursery trade regularly. That's not very good at all. So that's what I have to say about that one. I think there's one more question, right?
Yeah, well, we were going to, the sort of wrap up is, what is an effective strategy to convince existing nurseries to handle more natives? I think we've been sort of dallying a little bit, but Mandy, go.
Just real quickly, sorry, I'm just not good at holding these things. Having the propagation materials like a sufficient amount of propagation materials to actually implement this into our current operations is extremely important. You guys can tell us all day, like, hey, I think you should grow this, it's really cool, plant, but our grower, I was talking to Michael earlier, she's kind of like a cat. We have 2 cats. She's a little temperamental in a way which I understand, because she gets this all the time. Like, you should grow this, you should grow this. And she's kind of sick of it because she's not given any support to help her grow these things. So you guys as a Native Plant Society, you guys have tried these things, you've done trials, you've done propagation. Share some of that information with us, and seed sources, and bring us a couple 1-gallon plants. There was a guy, I don't know his last name. His name is Rob, but he would always kind of float around our booth at TNLA and, oh, you should grow this, you should grow this. But he would literally bring us in a cooler these plants. And they looked worse for the wear, but somehow we were like Benny's Gold, Anise Acanthus. And now we have thousands of them. Rock Rose, Ellen's Legacy, all these kind of sport plants have been really fun for us to try, but we tried them and they succeeded because we had that source. So that's extremely important to do if you want to suggest more natives.
So one of the things I was going to say earlier about how can NIPSOT help, and it's establishing a program to where you're working with, whether it's a retail nursery or the wholesale nursery, 5,000 people throughout the state of Texas. Each one of those can collect a single plant and provide it to nurseries. There you got it. Solve the problem. Yeah, there you go. But that's a huge thing, like having access, one is having access to the plants, but working with those nurseries, providing them with that material. And it's not that difficult. There's a lot of people out there. I know that I've passed some stuff along to y'all, and I've passed seeds along to numerous other nurseries in my time. And some of those have made it out, some of them haven't. But
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be fancy. The other day, or not the other day, it was a couple, David Mahler with Environmental Survey Consulting, he's great. He, in a coffee bag that still smelled like fresh coffee, brought us a bunch of Senegalia radii. And now we've got beautiful 5 gallons that I'm going to be bumping up to 15s, you know, because WeSat just had a rough couple of years. So we're trying to find a substitute for that one. But, I mean, it doesn't have to be, I mean, he just wrote, the one thing I will say is the date collected in the county is something that is really important to us because we do try and keep provenance within Texas. Just disclaimer. But anyway, it wasn't that difficult, and he gave us a link on an article about it, and we did a little of our own research and made it happen. So it doesn't have to be that complicated, for sure.
To Michael's point, though, you know, if you have 5,000 people doing it, that might be quite overwhelming. Would it perhaps be helpful for NIPSOT members to say,
To
maybe we have a
funnel-
goal of putting out, whatever, 20 species, I don't know, like some number like that?
I think having a
With a-
little more organized would definitely
Right.
be helpful, for sure. Maybe, yeah, pick 10 for the year. and then have that sufficient seed source, or, you know, like I said, cutting stock.
You heard her, she said 10,000 for the year.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Did I say 10,000?
Not, you said, we said 5,000, I'm just kidding, that's it. Yes, ma'am.
Who to contact, because several of our chapters have member growers. So Austin has 15 people who are member growers who are contributing to our native plant sale on the 19th. I personally have some plants that I'm growing that I can't get commercially. So
Oh, yeah.
if we had, you could have our contacts and we could have yours. That was one of our goals. If we're having good luck with something that's not grown commercially, could we share it with you and get it out to the
For
the
sure,
bigger
yeah.
community?
After this, I'll go over there and we can exchange. Yeah, we'll grow it for him and he can just buy it.
I've gone through the Native Landscape Certification Program, and there's some things that I've been disturbed with, one of which was when they go and say, do not plant earth-kind plants, do not plant Texas Superstars plants. And some of those plants are actually native plants, okay? And when I hear that, I mean, you're kind of denigrating much of what A&M has done in terms of research. And some of those plants like Texas Superstars, as much as you want to talk about, okay, we're going to put a bunch of native plants, we're going to advertise, we're going to make sure that people know about them. If you don't have that stock available and it gets published in the Houston Chronicle, the San Antonio Express, the Austin Statesman, or whatever it is up in Dallas, you don't have all that plant available. And it hits that market and says, this is the plant that you need to grow in your yard as a Texas native. It's a disaster. It's an absolute disaster. So, you know, as much as they want to denigrate, you know, Steve George or Jerry Parsons and all that, you know, by putting on non-native plants in the landscape. Those plants have been trialed over numerous years. They will grow in most of that DFW, Houston, San Antonio triangle, and they ensure that the growers have those plants available once it's advertised. So I think, you know, NIPSOT can't, and I've been to those as a volunteer at the San Antonio Expo for the last 8-9 years or whatever. It's been run down there. And I am so happy to see NIPSOT actually been there for the last 2 years and make a presence. But I think also they can go and identify plants that are native in that Texas Superstar folder or the Earth-kind folder, and identify those are actually natives, have a little logo or something to promote it. But to classify, do not plant Texas Superstars or Earth-kind in the Native Landscape Certification, I think that is not helpful at all.
I want to respond to that. If anybody knows who I am. Maybe I should have Bill do it.
No,
So I'll say a few things about the Texas Superstar program. Yeah, there's some good plants on there. So I just pulled it up while you were talking. One of them is Texas Columbine, or whatever they call it, Texas Gold Columbine. It's Hinckley Columbine. And it's no longer Hinckley Columbine. That thing's so hybridized at this point. It is nothing like what the native plant looks like. And those came from a certain area out in West Texas. So that's no longer a native plant. It's been so hybridized with anything else that's around. But there are a few others that are on there as well that are like the Turk's Cap. Great plant. You know, I think those are things that should be promoted. And I get it that they're looking across the state for these plants. But we need to be thinking more eco-regionally. And if someone from Dallas is growing something that grows in a single canyon in West Texas, is that really helping the cause? So we have so many other more plants out there that we can be using.
Can you layer a small thing on top of this about the ecological services that it provides to the native wildlife and
Right.
pollinators? And
We're running out of time. But it again, it's this, and I actually probably had written that down in one of my questions, but I will say that as more and more people become aware, and at San Antonio we have our plant sales and we have people coming in, there's been a shift from some of the typical plants we sold in the past to some of the natives, because people are aware of, hey, we have drought conditions, and then we want something that's a little bit more water-wise. Hey, we want our plants to provide that ecological service to whatever pollinator or birds that are in that area, recognizing the fact that, you know, a green lawn with a single tree in it is not really doing much for the wildlife that could be coming through. But I would say, and I think I said this earlier, that there's a huge demand for more diversity. It's there. We have people asking about it, and it takes people like us, all of us, to educate people further and say, hey, you know, maybe you don't want to buy this columbine that really isn't native. Buy the, you know, canadensis that was collected in Central Texas if you live in Bernie County, and that's what we should be doing.
Okay, well, I think we've reached our time limit. What? Okay.
Okay, so Veronica just wanted to say, we have to talk. The chapters have to talk with you guys, and we need to figure out a way to do it. Does that summarize it? Okay. I think that we learned that that's the case. We need to set up a relationship with our nurseries and our growers and talk about these things, as well as continue the education, et cetera. I didn't mean to take it away from you to wrap up. Okay, so we have to. So basically, we've learned a lot: education, talking amongst one another, propagation. I've written everything down. We'll have a summary, and I really appreciate you guys coming. Right now, we've got to vacate because these tables have to come out, and then we have to put in round tables for the award ceremony. So let's give the panel a round of applause. Thank you.